In 1997, Michael Jackson made a decision so secret, so emotional, that even members of his own team didn't know the truth until years later. He adopted a child. No press release. No cameras. No headlines. Why would the most famous man on earth hide something so life-changing? Who was this child? And what promise did Michael make that would quietly transform both of their lives forever? The world never heard this story until now. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss our emotional stories about Michael Jackson. Neverland Ranch, California, autumn 1997. The rain had been falling since morning, soft and endless, washing the hills in silver. Michael Jackson stood near the large front window, watching the drops slide down the glass like quiet tears. The house behind him was unusually silent, as if even the walls understood that something important was about to happen. He held a folded piece of paper in his hand. An address, a name, and a short message from a social worker in Los Angeles. He has no family. He asked for you. Michael had not slept the night before. He kept hearing the boy's voice in his mind, a voice he had only heard once, over the phone, small and uncertain, asking a question no child should ever have to ask. Are you really Michael Jackson? Michael had answered softly, yes, and after a long pause, the boy had whispered, will you stay with me? Now, as the black car pulled into the long driveway, Michael felt his chest tighten. He stepped outside beneath an umbrella, his shoes soaking on the stone, and watched the social worker emerge from the vehicle. She opened the back door. A boy climbed out. He was maybe 9 years old, too thin, too quiet, holding a small backpack that looked far too light to contain a childhood. His name was Daniel. The boy's eyes moved slowly over the massive gates, the tall trees, the distant buildings. Then they found Michael. He froze. Michael knelt immediately, ignoring the rain, lowering himself to Daniel's height. Hi, Michael said gently. Daniel stared at him, his hands tightening around the straps of his backpack. You sing, Daniel said. Michael smiled. Sometimes. The social worker cleared her throat. Daniel has been in 3 foster homes this year. Daniel didn't look at her. Michael reached out carefully. Would you like to come inside? It's warm. Daniel hesitated. Then he nodded once. Inside Neverland, the boy sat at the long dining table, while staff brought him soup, bread, hot chocolate. Daniel ate slowly, as if afraid the food might disappear if he moved too fast. Michael sat across from him, watching every movement. Do you like animals? Michael asked. Daniel shrugged. I used to. When my mom was alive. Silence filled the room. Michael felt something crack inside his chest. After dinner, Michael walked Daniel through the halls. The games, the theater, the trains, the lake. Daniel followed in silence, his eyes wide, but his face never quite relaxed. Finally, Michael led him to a small bedroom near his own. This can be yours, Michael said. Daniel placed his backpack on the floor. Do I have to leave? He asked. Michael knelt again, his voice barely above a whisper. Not if you don't want to. Daniel's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. That night, Michael sat alone in his room, staring at the adoption papers resting on the table. He had not told the press. He had not told his lawyers. He had barely told his closest friends. He had only told himself one thing. This child is not leaving. But the promise Michael was about to make, to a frightened boy and to his own heart, would change everything. And the world would never know. What happened next would test Michael in ways fame never had. The house slept, but Michael did not. The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m., its soft ticking echoing through the quiet hallway. Michael stood outside the small bedroom where Daniel had been placed, his hand hovering near the door as if he were afraid of waking a dream. He could hear the boy's breathing from the other side, shallow, uneven, uncertain. Michael pushed the door open just enough to see. Daniel lay curled beneath the blanket, his backpack clutched against his chest, as if it were the only thing anchoring him to this world. His eyes were open. Can't sleep? Michael whispered. Daniel shook his head. Michael entered and sat on the edge of the bed. The moonlight painted silver lines across the room. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Do you think this place is real?" Daniel asked quietly. Michael smiled sadly. "It is, but it doesn't matter. What matters is you." Daniel swallowed. "They always say that, and then they go away." Michael's heart tightened. "I won't," he said. Daniel's eyes flickered toward him. "They all say that." Michael leaned closer. "Not like this." Daniel looked at him for a long time, as if searching for cracks in his face. "My mom used to sing," Daniel whispered, "before she got sick. She said I was her miracle." Michael felt tears sting his eyes. She was right. Daniel's grip on the backpack loosened slightly. Michael rested his hand over his heart. "I know I'm just someone you met today, but I promise you something." Daniel waited. "I promise you that as long as I am breathing, you will never be alone again." Daniel's lip trembled. "You don't even know me." Michael smiled. "I know enough." Daniel finally let the backpack fall to the side. He turned onto his back, staring at the ceiling. "Will you stay?" he asked. Michael nodded. "All night." And he did. The next morning, Daniel ate breakfast with Michael and the staff. He barely spoke, but he watched everything. The way Michael said thank you. The way he laughed at nothing. The way he noticed when Daniel stopped eating. Later that day, Michael took him to see the animals. The giraffes, the llamas, the baby deer. Daniel smiled for the first time when a small monkey reached out and touched his finger. Michael knelt beside him. "He likes you," Daniel whispered. "No one ever does." Michael shook his head. "That's not true." Days turned into weeks. Michael canceled meetings, ignored calls, told the world nothing. The legal paperwork moved quietly. No press, no announcements, only a child learning how to sleep without fear. One afternoon, Daniel was sitting on the grass, drawing with chalk. Michael joined him. "What are you making?" Michael asked. "A house," Daniel said, "with people inside who don't leave." Michael's chest tightened. "Do you want to go to school here?" Michael asked. Daniel looked up. "Can I?" Michael smiled. "Yes." That night, Daniel had a nightmare. Michael found him crying, shaking, unable to speak. He sat beside him until the boy's breathing slowed. "They were calling me back," Daniel whispered. "I don't want to go back." Michael wrapped his arms around him. "You're home," he said. "No one is taking you." Weeks passed. Daniel laughed more, slept deeper, walked through the house like it belonged to him. One night, he stood in the doorway of Michael's room. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why me?" Michael thought for a long moment. "Because sometimes love chooses you before you know how to choose it." Daniel nodded slowly. The adoption was finalized on a rainy afternoon. Only Michael, Daniel, the social worker, and a judge were present. When it was done, Daniel whispered, "So I'm yours now?" Michael knelt. "No, I'm yours too." Daniel smiled, and that secret promise, spoken in the dark, would define both of their lives forever. But the world outside those gates was about to notice something had changed. And when it did, Michael would be forced to protect that promise at any cost. The change in Michael was impossible to hide. He smiled more. He slept. He canceled less and laughed without forcing it. The people around him noticed. His assistant asked if he was seeing someone. A longtime friend whispered that he looked lighter. Even the staff at Neverland exchanged quiet glances. But no one knew why. Michael insisted on silence. "No one needs to know," he said. "This is his life, not a headline." Daniel followed him everywhere. To the studio, the garden, the theater, the quiet rooms where Michael used to sit alone for hours. The boy never asked for anything. He simply stayed close, as if afraid the world might pull Michael away. One afternoon, Michael was recording a soft melody on the piano. Daniel sat beside him, swinging his feet. "That song sounds sad," Daniel said. Michael nodded. "Sometimes sad songs help us breathe." Daniel leaned against him. "I don't feel sad anymore." Michael's fingers froze on the keys. "Why not?" Daniel shrugged. "Because you're here." Michael swallowed hard. At night, Daniel began leaving his door open. "Just in case," he said. Michael left his open too. The social worker returned once a week, quietly checking Daniel's progress. Every report was the same. He was gaining weight, sleeping through the night, laughing, asking about school, making friends. The judge called Michael's decision unusual. Michael replied, "So was my childhood." The secrecy grew harder to maintain when Michael's tour planning resumed. The world wanted him back. Michael wanted Daniel safe. He arranged private tutors, secured back entrances, adjusted his entire life around a boy no one was supposed to know existed. Daniel never complained. One night, while walking through the garden, Daniel asked, "Are they going to make you go away again?" Michael stopped. "No," he said. "Not if I can help it." Daniel whispered, "They always make people go away." Michael knelt. "Not this time." The first leak happened in a restaurant in Santa Monica. A photographer caught a glimpse of a small hand holding Michael's. The headline the next day: "Who was the mystery child with Michael Jackson?" Michael's chest tightened when he saw it. Daniel noticed. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. Michael shook his head. "No, you just exist." The pressure returned. Phone calls, questions, offers for interviews. Michael said nothing. Another photo appeared. Then another. Speculation exploded. Daniel overheard staff whispering and grew quiet. That night, he stood in Michael's doorway. "They're talking about me," he said. Michael walked to him. "They don't get to decide who you are." Daniel's eyes filled. "I don't want them to take you." Michael wrapped him in his arms. "They won't." But the world kept knocking. Michael finally called a private meeting with his legal team. "They're circling," one lawyer said. "Soon they'll demand answers." Michael's voice was steady. "They get none." Daniel's schoolmates asked questions. Strangers stared. Someone shouted his name outside the gate. Daniel began sleeping with the lights on. Michael sat with him until he fell asleep every night. "I'm not leaving," Michael whispered, over and over. The breaking point came when a reporter climbed the fence. Security caught him before he reached the house. Daniel saw everything. He started shaking. Michael held him and said the words he had been holding back. "I adopted you." Daniel froze. "What?" "You're my son." Daniel stared at him. "For real?" Michael nodded. Daniel burst into tears. That night, Daniel slept in Michael's room for the first time. The world outside grew louder, but inside, something sacred had been spoken, and Michael knew the hardest part was still ahead. The next morning, the world woke up louder than it had ever been. Michael sat at the breakfast table with Daniel, the sunlight pouring through the windows, while the phone rang again and again in the other room. He ignored it. Daniel pushed the cereal around his bowl, not eating. "Are they coming back?" Daniel asked quietly. Michael shook his head. "Not here." But even as he spoke the words, Michael knew something had shifted. Once the world's eyes turned toward secret, they rarely looked away. His legal team arrived before noon. "They want confirmation," one of the attorneys said. "Not just about the child, but about everything." Michael's jaw tightened. "They're not entitled to anything." Another lawyer sighed. "They'll keep pushing." Michael looked down at Daniel. The boy's shoulders were tense, his eyes fixed on the floor. "This stops now," Michael said. He called a meeting that evening with the people he trusted most. No press, no leaks, just family and protection. "We're moving," Michael told them. For a while, they relocated Daniel to a quieter place outside the city. New routines, new school, new privacy. Michael followed him everywhere. He adjusted his entire schedule around Daniel's life. School drop-offs, homework, dinners, movie nights. He learned how to cook spaghetti. He learned how to pack lunches. He learned how to help with math. And Daniel began to change. He laughed loudly. He slept deeply. He stopped checking over his shoulder. One night, while sitting on the floor building a model airplane, Daniel said, "I think my mom would like you." Michael froze. "I hope so," he whispered. The press, however, did not stop. Headlines turned ugly. Rumors twisted. Some accused Michael of hiding something. Others speculated endlessly. Michael refused every interview. Daniel asked, "Why don't you tell him the truth?" Michael brushed his hair back. "Because the truth is yours, not theirs." The pressure grew. One afternoon, Daniel came home from school with red eyes. "They asked me if you're my real dad," he said. Michael knelt. "What did you say?" Daniel whispered, "I said yes." Michael pulled him close. "Always yes." That night, Michael wrote a letter, not for the press, for Daniel. He wrote about the night they met, about the promise he made, about how love doesn't come from blood, but from staying. He placed it in a drawer. The next day, the first official document arrived demanding a public statement. Michael tore it in half. Daniel saw him do it. He smiled. The world outside grew restless. But inside their quiet house, a father and son were learning how to belong to each other. And the bond they were building would soon face its greatest test. Because the past Michael had been running from was about to collide with the future he had chosen. The letter arrived on a gray afternoon, sealed in thick cream paper, delivered by a courier who refused to meet Michael's eyes. Michael knew the handwriting. He stood in the entryway for a long moment, the envelope heavy in his hand, the house quiet behind him. Daniel was in the next room practicing spelling words, his voice soft and focused. The ordinary sound of it steadied Michael as he finally opened the letter. It was from a man Michael had not spoken to in years, someone from his past, someone who had known him when he was younger, more fragile, more afraid to say no. The letter was calm, polite, and laced with threat. "You can't hide a life this big. You owe people. You always have." Michael folded the paper slowly and slid it into his pocket. That night, he could not sleep. He lay awake listening to the house breathe, thinking about the years he had spent believing that loyalty meant obedience, that protection meant silence, that love meant sacrifice without limits. He had carried that belief into every corner of his life. And now, for the first time, it was being tested by something that mattered more than his own survival. Daniel. The next morning, Michael met with his legal team in a small office overlooking the city. He placed the letter on the table. "They're circling again," one of the lawyers said. Michael nodded. "They think I'll fold. They're implying they'll go public with things from the past," another added. Michael leaned back in his chair, eyes on the ceiling. "They won't win." "But the damage," the lawyer began. "I know," Michael said, "and I still won't let them near my son." The word son felt stronger every time he spoke it. When Michael returned home, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table coloring. He looked up and smiled. "I made you," Daniel said, holding up a picture. Two stick figures stood under a bright yellow sun. One was taller, one was smaller. Both were smiling. Michael's throat tightened. "That's beautiful." Daniel pointed to the taller one. "That's you. You're holding my hand." Michael swallowed hard. Later that evening, Michael received another call. Then another. Old contacts resurfaced. Names he had buried long ago. He didn't answer. Instead, he sat on the floor with Daniel and built a tower out of blocks until it collapsed and they both laughed. After Daniel fell asleep, Michael sat alone in the living room, the weight of everything pressing against him. He pulled the letter from his pocket again. This time, he wrote a reply. Not long, not defensive, just true. "I don't owe you my life anymore. I am protecting my family." He sealed it and handed it to his attorney the next morning. The response was swift. Articles appeared hinting at hidden secrets. Commentators speculated. Old footage resurfaced, twisted and misused. The noise began again. Daniel noticed the tension. "Are you mad?" he asked one night. Michael shook his head. "No, I'm brave." Daniel smiled. "You are. But bravery has a cost." One afternoon, Michael was called into a private meeting with people who had once controlled parts of his career. They sat across from him, their expressions smooth, their words rehearsed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," one of them said. Michael met his eyes. "I'm making it honest." They spoke of obligations, contracts, consequences. Michael spoke of boundaries. When the meeting ended, Michael walked out into the sunlight and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Freedom. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that comes when you finally stop negotiating your worth. That night, Daniel crawled into Michael's bed after a nightmare. Michael wrapped his arms around him. Are they to take you? Daniel whispered. Michael kissed his forehead. Never. The past kept knocking. Michael stopped answering, because he finally understood that some doors are not meant to be open again. And the next time the world tried to take something from him, Michael Jackson would not run. He would stand, and that stand would change everything. The morning broke with a pale light that felt uncertain, as if the sky itself were waiting to see what he would do. Michael sat at the kitchen table long after the sun had risen, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea he had forgotten to drink. Outside, the garden was still, the leaves barely moving. Inside, his heart was steady in a way he did not recognize from his old life. He was afraid, yes, but it was a clean fear that comes with truth, not the choking fear that grows in silence. Daniel came in wearing his backpack, shoes half-tied. I'm ready, he said. Michael smiled. Let me help you with those. He knelt and tied the laces carefully, the small ritual grounding him. Daniel leaned forward and pressed his forehead to Michael's shoulder, then straightened and ran out the door. Michael watched him go, feeling the promise he had made tighten into something unbreakable. The phone rang as soon as Daniel was out of sight. It was his attorney. They released another piece, she said. Not new, but framed to make it look new. They're testing you. Michael closed his eyes. What do you recommend? We can issue a statement, or we can do nothing. Michael opened his eyes and looked at the quiet house. We do nothing. When he hung up, he walked through the rooms, touching the walls, the photos, the small traces of a life being rebuilt. He felt the old urge to run to the noise, to defend himself, to perform safety. He let it pass. Later that afternoon, a black car rolled up the long drive. 2 men stepped out, careful smiles in place. They asked for Michael. He met them at the door. We just want to talk, one of them said. Michael nodded. Here. They spoke on the porch, the air heavy between them. You're making this complicated, the other man said. Michael's voice was calm. I'm making it simple. You don't get to rewrite history, the first man replied. I'm not, Michael said. I'm choosing my future. They mentioned names, dates, obligations. Michael listened without flinching. When they finished, he said, You don't have permission to come here again. The men exchanged a glance. We'll see, one of them said. Michael shook his head. No, you won't. They left without another word. That evening, Daniel came home quiet. He set his backpack down and went straight to his room. Michael followed and found him sitting on the bed, staring at his hands. Something happened? Michael asked. Daniel hesitated. A kid at school said you're in trouble. Michael sat beside him. Did it make you scared? Daniel nodded. A little. Michael took his hand. Sometimes doing the right thing makes people uncomfortable. That doesn't make it wrong. Daniel looked up. Are we okay? Michael smiled. We are. They ate dinner together, talked about spelling tests and favorite animals and what movie to watch later. Michael felt the world outside pressing, but it no longer reached him the way it used to. He was inside the life he had chosen. That night, he found the letter he had written for Daniel and read it again. He added a line at the bottom. If the world ever tells you I was anything but yours, they are wrong. Days passed. The noise grew and then softened. Stories contradicted each other. People tired of the same questions. The pressure shifted. Michael kept his routines. Morning walks. School pickups. Quiet writing. Laughter after dinner. One morning, he woke with his heart racing. The old fear rose fast. He sat up, pressed his hand to his chest, and breathed until the panic faded. He wrote in his notebook, "Courage is staying." That afternoon, his attorney called again. "They're backing off," she said. "Not completely, but they're losing momentum." Michael closed his eyes. "Thank you." When he hung up, he went to the garden and stood in the sun, letting it warm his face. He felt the stand he had taken settle into his bones. That weekend, he took Daniel to the lake. They skipped stones and counted the rings on the water. Daniel laughed when Michael missed and teased him when he finally got a good throw. "See," Daniel said, "you're getting better." Michael laughed. "So are you." As they walked back, Daniel slipped his hand into Michael's. The gesture was small and huge all at once. On the way home, they passed a billboard with Michael's face on it. From a time when the world had demanded everything. Daniel looked up at it, then back at Michael. "That you?" he asked. Michael nodded. "A version of me." Daniel smiled. "I like this one." Michael felt something loosen inside him. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, Michael sat on the porch with Catherine. The stars were bright, the air soft. "You did it," she said. "I'm doing it," Michael replied. She nodded. "That's better." He thought of the men on the porch, the calls, the stories. He thought of the lake, the hand in his, the laugh. The balance felt right. He went inside and wrote one more line in his notebook. "I stood, and the world learned I was not for sale." The next challenge would come. He knew life does not stop testing us when we choose it. But he had learned how to remain. And in that learning, Michael Jackson had finally become what he had always been searching for, a father who stays. The final chapter would show how that stand became a legacy no stage could ever match. The morning arrived quietly, as if the world itself had learned how to move more gently around them. Michael woke before the sun, the house still, the sky a pale blue, just beginning to breathe. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, listening to the rhythm of his own heart, no longer afraid of its sound. It had become his compass, reminding him where he was, who he was, and what he had chosen. He walked through the hallway and paused at Daniel's door. The boy slept on his side, one hand tucked beneath the pillow, the other resting against his chest. Michael watched him for a moment, the memory of the first night they met flickering through his mind, the backpack, the fear, the question that had broken him open. Will you stay? Michael had stayed, and he would keep staying. He stepped outside into the cool morning air, barefoot on the stone, and let the quiet surround him. He made coffee, not because he needed it, but because he liked the ritual now. He had learned to love small things. The smell of bread, the sound of birds, the way sunlight crept across the floor. When Daniel woke, they ate breakfast together, laughing about a dream Daniel had where they were both astronauts trying to land on the moon, but forgetting how to steer. Michael laughed until his chest hurt. Later, they drove to the lake again. They did not tell anyone. They did not bring security. They brought sandwiches and a blanket, and a book of silly jokes Daniel had borrowed from the school library. They sat near the water, shoes off, their feet in the grass. Michael watched the wind move across the lake and felt a sense of peace he had never known on any stage. Daniel leaned back on the blanket and looked up at the sky. "Do you think my mom can see this?" he asked. Michael's chest tightened. "Yes," he said softly. "I think she sees you, and she's proud." Daniel smiled. They skipped stones. They counted clouds. They talked about nothing and everything. As the afternoon faded, Daniel grew quiet. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Always." Daniel hesitated. "Before you, I thought people only kept me because they had to. Now I know some people keep you because they want to." Michael's eyes filled with tears he did not hide. "That's the only kind of love that matters," he whispered. When they returned home, the mailbox held a thick envelope. Michael recognized the seal immediately. Inside was a formal notice from people who had once believed they owned parts of his life. The language was careful, restrained. They were withdrawing their demands, backing away, closing the door. Michael read the page once, then folded it and placed it in the drawer with all the others. The world had finally learned what he already knew. He was no longer the boy who said yes because he was afraid. He was a father who said no because he was strong. That night, Michael cooked dinner. Daniel helped, dropping noodles on the floor and laughing too hard when the sauce splashed his shirt. They ate at the small table. No rush, no noise. Afterward, they watched a movie and fell asleep on the couch. Michael woke later, careful not to disturb Daniel, and carried him to bed. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the boy breathe, feeling the shape of the life they had built. In his room, Michael opened his notebook for the last time. He wrote, I used to think my legacy would be built on music and lights and applause. I was wrong. My legacy is in the child who no longer sleeps afraid. It is in the mornings that arrive quietly. It is in choosing love when no one is watching. He closed the book. Days turned into weeks. The world moved on to other stories. Michael did not. He remained where he was. He took Daniel to school. He learned how to make better pancakes. He planted new trees in the garden. He laughed more than he ever had in his life. And sometimes late at night, he would sit on the porch and look at the stars and whisper a thank you to the boy he had been for surviving long enough to become a man who could finally protect someone else. One evening, Daniel stood beside him and said, "I don't think I'm scared anymore." Michael knelt. "Neither am I." They stood there together, the quiet surrounding them, the world no longer demanding anything from either of them. Michael Jackson did not disappear. He arrived, not as a legend, not as a headline, but as a father who stayed. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves Michael Jackson. If this story inspired you, remember, even legends face battles unknown to the world. Subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves Michael Jackson.